Wish you were one of those influencers with raving fans who binge on your every word, consume all your content, buy everything you have to sell, and demand even more? Then stay tuned while Authority Magazine columnist and BuzzFeed contributor Tracy Hazzard shares strategies, tips, and tactics from top videocasters, podcasters, authors, and social influencers on creating that bingeable factor. Now, let's join Tracy as she explores how to rise above all the digital noise with the binge factor.
Hey everyone, welcome to another Binge Factor. I'm Tracy Hazzard, and today I have Rick Girard, Higher Power Radio Show. And it's higher, H-I-R-E. So we're talking some HR stuff. We're talking some recruitment. We're talking some hiring today. Rick helps entrepreneurs and startup founders eliminate bad hires by building a value-driven interview process that produces concrete evidence to support each and every hiring decision. Wouldn't that be great if you knew it was going to work out instead of thought it was going to work out? So this is why you'd listen to his podcast. So Rick is the founder and CEO of Stride Search, an engaged search firm. He's extremely passionate about helping startup founders win the strongest hires to fuel unprecedented company growth. Rick's career has kept him laser focused on building tech startups in the highly competitive Silicon Valley space. Over his career, he's helped build more than 200 startup teams that have successfully exited. Value and impact are the two main ingredients brought to every interaction above and beyond just locating the strongest people. Rick is the author of Healing Career Wounds, invented and systematized the hiring operating system, Hire OS, the solution for leaders to win the strongest hires by blowing up best practices with a humanistic, evidence-driven, unbiased, and time-efficient experience. When not running a school for gifted mutants as Professor X, Rick hosts the Higher Power Radio Show and podcast, a weekly series on LinkedIn Live, which serves as a business leader's resource to solve their most difficult hiring challenges. I really had so much fun, but not just that. Rick and I are in each other's backyards, and we just discovered that we are in the same town. So we've got to get together live soon. Of course, as always, we've done our interview via the internet, via Zoom, as we always do here. But Rick and I are looking forward to getting to know each other better over time. That's what I love about podcasting and getting to know people all over the place. So let's go hear about Higher Power Radio Show, and let's talk to Rick Girard. Rick, so glad to talk with you today. And I mean, we should be meeting in person. We're like next door. So
I know, right, Tracy? We'll have to go grab like a lunch or something afterwards. I didn't know that you were in a run as well. That's amazing.
Yeah, I know. It's so great. As like, I'm doing research. I'm like, why didn't I research this part sooner? Then I would have known. We could have set it up different. I know. So the Higher Power Radio Show, and I love it. It's Higher, H-I-R-E.
Yes, it's not a religious show.
That's right. Higher Power, which you have an amazing agency, Stride Search, and you have a formula, Higher OS, and process that you use that's really interesting. So I'm assuming that you started your show because of wanting to make sure that people were aware of what you do differently as a recruiter.
You know, what's funny is I actually started my show because I got coerced into it.
Okay, that we need to hear. How'd you get coerced?
I know, right? I used to be in a building in Costa Mesa called Tech Space, and there was a gentleman who had a radio station called OC Talk Radio, and I used to have to walk past his station to go to the bathroom. And every time he wasn't running a show, he'd see me walk by, he'd accost me and say, "Hey, you need to you need to do a show." And I'm like, "Really, I don't."
So we know OC Talk Radio really well. But now that explains why you have radio in your title for your podcast.
Exactly. Yeah, because it started out as a radio show and podcast, right? And so yeah, I did it with him for a little bit, and then kind of took it in-house and went off, and I joined a thing called Sitch Radio, and I've been kind of running on the Sitch Radio platform.
So, this is interesting, this conundrum, I'm going to say, a lot of people have with whether or not they do radio or podcast or both together and how this works for you. Have you found it to be easy?
No, it's never easy, right? But
so even having a radio show where it should be dialed in isn't any easier.
Well, you know what I have found though is that when you have a set time and structure and you call it a radio show, people show up and they don't cancel as much. So there's been I get very few cancellations. If I do, it's usually a week in advance, and it's kind of it runs pretty much on my calendar, and I like that part. I like the predictability of it.
That's a really interesting insight into why that would work for you.
Yeah, when you call it a radio show, and then also, like when it's when you have a guest in the studio too, then they have that experience. Never do they cancel when that's the case.
That's so true, right? Yeah, you really show up for your meetings, right?
Yeah, especially since we're booked like 3 months out, right? So like we try to keep a good flow or consistent booking so that we don't have to, so we can essentially like we just go every week and kind of keep it as low impact on me as possible, because it's not my main business, obviously, but I enjoy it, and it's certainly like I get to meet some great people, which is kind of the reason why I keep doing it.
Well, seeing we're talking about this, let's talk about how you get great guests. Let's jump into our 3 things that we talked to everybody about. And, how do you decide if a guest is meeting the sort of criteria that you have? So
I have, so we actually go after, and we will actively go through LinkedIn and find guests. We tend to go after founders of startups and companies that we tend to like to work with, or we resonate with, or who are our audience. Because the way in which I approach it is it's kind of a pure learning format, right? I can talk about what I do all day long, but usually when it comes from a peer or somebody that somebody knows and respects, and we're comparing how we do things, it becomes a very productive and a valuable asset to the audience. So if I'm understanding you right, so like saying that you want to be, your profile of customers. So even if this person in particular isn't your client, there's that association to how they're doing things and what they're doing that is going to come back to you, basically. Yes, much more eloquently put on your end than mine.
But it's my job to summarize, right?
I know. Thank you. So to find guests, I work a lot through my network. I'm constantly out and about. I'm part of EOs, so I kind of work through that ecosystem. And then, of course, I'm a recruiter by trade. Like that's how I've been trained through my whole life. So, it's not difficult for me to just pick up the phone and call somebody that I don't know and say, "Hey, I have a podcast. Would you like to be on it?"
You don't have any fear of that. I love it.
No, none whatsoever.
So over time, has it sort of shifted and gotten more and more refined as you really found what was resonating with your audience?
I don't know if it's gotten refined. I always tell everybody, hey, the show's really good except for the host.
That's not true. That's so not true.
I know.
It's a good show.
I poke fun of myself more than anybody else. Yeah, you know what? I think it's gotten refined. We've gotten the formula down to it's a problem solution show. We want to identify a specific problem that you've had, or that maybe somebody in the audience has had, that you have solved. And that's kind of the idea behind it, is that, and it should be in and around hiring somehow, because everybody's had hiring challenges. There's nothing there's not a lot of content out there that covers it. And we really target our market toward like entrepreneurs and business leaders who are kind of doing it themselves and struggling with it.
Yeah, because that's your ideal audience, right? Really, this is it's interesting that you focus, because I don't find that there's a lot of recruiting companies that tend to work in that founders area, in that early stage startup area. And is there a particular reason you chose that? Because I feel like I resonate best with founders, and I am a founder as well. I'll tell you about that later, but also I feel like that is the place where the most impact can be made, because ultimately, like if you come down to this whole hiring process, I think where most of the mistakes are made, because you can find recruiters that do a great job and they find you great people,
But when it comes down to actually interviewing the people, that's where the wheels come off the bus most of the time. And it's because, founders don't really have any clue how to interview people or how to evaluate whether or not they're aligned with the organization. And so it ends up being wow, this person's really excited about us, we should just hire them. Or you like baseball, I like baseball, we should hire you. Or, hey, this person comes out of Google and that'll look really good to our investors, we should hire you. But there's really not a whole lot of evidence to support whether or not you should hire somebody.
No, that's so true. As you're saying that, I'm sitting there listening I've seen a lot of presentations about how that first team can be so valuable to investors or be this and be that, but then it just goes so wrong in the growth stage because those first hires weren't the right ones.
Oh, yeah. And by the way, in my career, I've been brought in to fix that problem hundreds of times. We've got a co-founder who's not working out, or this VP that we hired is completely just rubbing everybody the wrong way. And, those are the problems I've been solving for a very, very long time. So, why not get it out to the masses so that not everybody makes those mistakes?
Yeah. So we hire right to begin with. I love it. So you've got kind of a message and a mission. And how are you getting listeners to join? How are you getting, are your clients listening? Are your prospective clients listening? How are you getting them to know about the show?
Yeah, we've done a lot of, we built a pretty solid network on LinkedIn. And I think most of our growth has come from LinkedIn. Because we were putting out, at one point, we were putting out 2 to 3 pieces of content a day on LinkedIn. We've kind of slowed down and we've kind of hit this kind of plateau. So interesting you mentioned that. I mean, I am not the best at marketing. You get me in a room with somebody face to face, then that's where I shine. But me, getting my message out, I'm fairly terrible at that.
Yeah, but your podcast is a conversation. So that's working for you. So you got that part. So now you just need to figure out how to repurpose it and use it. I love that. No, I think LinkedIn makes a lot of sense because it's got the right ecosystem of people searching and looking, right? So you've got it on both sides. So are you getting, I would say, as equal connections between those looking for work and those who are, obviously posting their jobs with you?
Gosh, it's funny because, I don't know if you have this experience, but all we get as far as demographics is where somebody is who downloads a podcast. So I only get feedback from email as to who our listener base is. And I've got kind of I think I started out as a recruiting podcast, and then we've evolved to cater more to founders. But I think most of our audience are primarily, I try to get to more founders. I don't know if I'm getting to the right, and I don't know if we're playing with the algorithm for LinkedIn well enough. I mean, there's so many things that I don't know, but I guess if I really got into it and nerded out on it, I probably would have hit 100,000 downloads per episode already, but
so this is why you and I are going to get lunch together so we can nerd out together and we can get into the weeds on this. I would love that. That's that's a whole new podcast we should record at some point. I think it's great. But I think this is really common in this area. Whenever I ask people about how they're increasing listeners or, are they focusing on one listener versus another? They don't have an answer because the data is not there. You're not wrong about that it's missing. And so what is that feedback loop? We found personally that it's actually tracking between your website and your podcast and not looking at the podcast in isolation. And that's where people don't always check. And it's kind of how we built our platform, was to be able to make sure we could correlate the two, because that is really where most people are going to see the ability to understand who's coming into your website and are those the right kind of people? And are we getting an increase in founder traffic or, recruiting traffic? What are we getting more of at any given time?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I've been heads down into I'm building a startup now. So I am now a startup founder as well.
Tell us a little bit about that. You teased to that. So what are you starting up?
Yeah, so I started up a company with co-founders called InterTrue, and it's based on my hiring operating system. And basically what we're doing is we're merging methodology with AI and a SaaS platform to actually run an interview process for each company. And it's geared for smaller companies so that essentially You can plug anybody into it. We build everything around core values. So then the interview questions are designed to extract evidence to support whether or not somebody aligns with the core values. And then on the skills side, like it's just completely a structured, mapped out interview process that anybody can go in. All the questions and sub questions are there. You just ask them, you conduct the interview, and then our algorithm and our back end will actually kind of flag things and make sure that interview is consistent, and it's also kind of gathering evidence, but it's also eliminating bias or not eliminating, but minimizing bias in personal motives and whatever else kind of seeps into an interview, like gut feeling, like I just don't feel like the person's going to be good here.
Yeah. So true. Well, that's so interesting. So you got my strategic brain working so your podcast actually is going to be such a great marketing tool for this new business if you shift your show, right? So it'll be a slight shift in show to more founders, and it'll be a broader look at that startup stages, because a SaaS is much lower cost entry point. Yeah. And so, you're really going to have a lot of that. And then on the backside of it is like me thinking about repurposing on LinkedIn. Like, what could you do? Could you be asking a core values question, and that from every single guest that comes through that you then use on LinkedIn that would tie to the sales of the SaaS. So like, you're by building a good podcast that already has this longevity to it. Now you start to make these tweaks and shifts. I'm going to see lots more future monetization options for you in terms of like driving SaaS subscribers.
See, now you're giving up all my thunder.
Love it.
That's kind of the idea, right? I mean, using the book and the podcast to drive more audience to it. I think that's something that I think a lot of founders don't have.
Well, a lot of founders don't have. And the reality is that you've already built trust and integrity over time by having the show first, not waiting until you're trying to push and launch a new product to bring that out. You're giving your audience, oh, wow, look how many episodes he's already done. He's been serving for a really long time. And now he's promoting this product or this service. That's awesome, because you deserved it. You earned the right to do that. Yeah,
I hope so.
Yeah, we'll keep seeing if this works. Well, let's talk about the last of the three things I usually ask about, which is return on investment. Usually it's return on investment of time, but you've also put money into it because you've hired producers and you have staff that you put against that. So what do you look for? What says to you every time you're like about to, sign a check, or, well, I don't know that we do that anymore, about to send some funds and pay a bill, that you think, Venmo. I should keep podcasting. Yeah, Venmo. Should I keep podcasting? What is it that makes you say, hey, this is working for me and I'm going to keep going?
Well, it's been a great business development tool for search practice. I mean, I've been able to meet and align with a lot of other entrepreneurs, and I've helped them to kind of grow their company. So we've been able to kind of help out with searches, and then also putting a lot of the structural components of what Hire OS is into their business. So there's been the podcast probably has paid for itself for another 5 years already.
Wow. See, that's a great return on investment.
Yeah. From that perspective. And then, we were fortunate enough, we had, and we're kind of still working on, we've had sponsors that have paid us as well. And that was really lucrative, especially over the past 3 years. From the perspective of it covered like all of our expenses and allowed us to hire some additional people. Like the podcast is actually for us. I'm a sales guy. So I don't want to do anything unless it monetizes or it's continuing to monetize. But it's been a huge like kind of credibility builder. And not only that, it's really easy to open the door, by the way, with a podcast. It's, as a salesperson, if you're a salesperson, you don't have a podcast, I think you're silly.
It does make it easier on you, doesn't it?
It does, because I don't call and say, hey, I want to do business with you. I say, hey, I have a podcast. I'd like to have you come be a guest. So I'm actually giving an individual like a chance to use their voice and an experience that a lot of people haven't had before, to be a guest on a podcast. And And as I get to know them, I try to help them out. And if I can help them, great. And if I can't, that's fine too, right?
Yeah.
All I'm doing is expanding my network and getting to meet some really, really great people, some phenomenal people.
Yeah, that's my favorite part about it, is getting to meet new people.
Yeah, totally.
It's like I always look at it, not that my podcast doesn't make us money. It definitely makes us business, makes our business money. But I look at it as, if I didn't have that connection point each week, I know I wouldn't be exponentially growing my marketplace. Yeah. I wouldn't be growing my network, and I can easily name keynotes and other things that came from having my podcast. So it's just, to me, that then meant more relationships or more partners or other things that came about because of those opportunities. So there really is no way for, if someone really sat down, if you're looking for that in and out, like I made this much in ad dollars and that's my definition only, I think they're missing the point.
Yeah, I didn't, that was kind of my thinking when I first started doing it, was like, hey, I'm going to sell advertising. I'm going to make all this money off it. I got all entrenched in the JLD, with Podcasters Paradise thing, and like I got into it for a little while, and then I was kind of like, you know what, I'm not going to make a living off doing a podcast. It's just not who I am.
You don't want to go through that influencer pain. So speaking of pain, like this is where I really want to dive into your binge factor. So giving my psychoanalysis of your show or comparison against all those ones out there. But, this is the Higher Power Radio and Podcast is just that show that's not afraid to dive into the pain. You ask the pain point questions, and I think that's critically important. Too often when we are trying to interview someone who's maybe our prospective client, when we're using our podcast as a business development tool, we go only for the good stuff. We want to highlight them in the best light and only talk about their successes. And that's a mistake. I think by highlighting their pain, it gives you an opportunity for further conversation. And you do that really well, so that it's not only generating, I'm sure, a conversation between you and your guest after the call or in the future, but it's generating that in my mind as a listener, which makes me want to find out more about you, work with you, think about that. And that's got to be, I think, the critical factor in why somebody will binge on your show and then decide to work with you. And you had no clue that they were like, and they just came out of the woodwork. That's probably that person that is going to come through like that. And it's because you highlight the pain. Yeah.
I have kind of this 3-pillar thing that I believe in is pain, desire, and impact, right? So those are the 3 most important. And it's not about me, it's about them, and that's the other thing is I often struggle with, kind of putting myself out there, because I'm more of one of these people, I like to lift others around me and kind of make, I don't know, maybe I'm an enabler. I don't know. Psychological term would be, but the thing is that I want people to be able to kind of have an experience and elevate and then get them to a better position. Right?
Yeah, I think that's so true. But hitting that messaging of pain and desire and impact is like really common language that puts you at the same level as founders. Like this is what they're pitching to their investors. It's what they're pitching to their early clients, right? Or their early adopters in their space. Yeah. It's going to be one of those 3 things or all of them, right? And so you're already on a language par with them, which I think makes a big difference.
Yeah, definitely.
So what's some of your favorite, the favorite ahas you got out of your podcast? What are something that you heard and you were like, that's changed something in my business, or I need to add that service? Has there been anything like that really kind of informed you in a way that you hadn't expected?
Well, there's always little things, right? Because I always find it, one of the things we do is we talk about what people are doing that's working for them, right? So I have my way of running an interview process, but which to me is like the only way to do it, of course, because it works, right? But there's a lot of companies out there that have figured it out for themselves, and they're doing it in a very right way, and that's unique to their organization. And they're able to really stack the deck with really good people. And gosh, I just had an episode a couple of weeks ago where my guest was like every we were just riffing back and forth, and the way he runs his interview process, and he evaluates for core values and hires based on core values. We were speaking the same language, but what was interesting is the way he solved the problem and went about doing it was very different but it was all, to me, like, okay, this is like really, it's a different way than I'm doing it, but like it works and it's working great for them,
Yeah, that's so interesting because I just was talking to a creative agency in Arizona who's going to be on the podcast the week after yours. So they'll be theirs is going to be after yours airs, and they were saying something about how they felt that the podcast actually helped express their core values in a better way because the creative agency is a little hard to like lay out your core values. It's a little more complex, and that they were getting applications to work for them that were so far above what they had received in the past that it made the podcast worth it from that standpoint, because good people in an agency, marketing agency of any kind are the most valuable asset you have. And so I think that's really kind of interesting to be thinking about, like, how can you express those core values in a way in all the things that you're doing?
Well, we started putting core values in job descriptions. These are our values, and then use that language in your job description. And what I find is you don't get as many applicants, which I think is great, because sifting through 300 resumes is so time consuming and a waste of everybody's time. But so we put the core values in, we use the language, and then we say, hey, if this resonates with you, send us an email with these 3 questions, answer these 3 questions. If you want to send us a resume, that's great too, but you don't have to. And what's interesting is like the people who respond are the people you want to talk to.
That's so interesting.
Because they resonate with who you are as an organization.
And I see that. We do the same thing. We actually put our core values right there up front in our job descriptions on the sidebar, because they're the outcomes we want as well. And so I think they tie in together really well. But I hadn't realized, like, we just do that. I don't know how I came up with it. We just did it. And but yeah, thinking about that. Well, I love that. I think core values come across a lot of times when founders get a chance to talk, and it doesn't always. It can be too orchestrated when they're trying to like form their brand and write this out and formalize this, that it doesn't really come across really clearly as to what those true values are. And
well, they're often aspirational too. And that's where I think companies get into trouble, right?
Right. Well, because you haven't built your company yet. You're a founder, you're a startup, it's coming.
Well, even if you have, like, even if you started to, I always use Enron as an example. I mean, their core value is integrity, right? Like,
it missed the mark, right?
Was that aspirational? All day long. Was it real? No. So, and that's the thing, is like, you really have to kind of do a bit of a deep dive on yourself and say, who am I? And what do I stand for? And then how do I want this business to grow? What's the North Star by which this business grows? Because I'm providing this, like, this context and measurables around it.
So not to complicate all the stuff that you're working on and doing, but it just occurred to me that not only do you need this in the interview process to find the right matches, but you also need it in a review process. Are you going to be adding that to your SaaS, like the annual reviews or the 6-month reviews? Because that's where I find I have the most difficulty. How am I evaluating this person? And
God, you know what?
Core value evaluation seemed like it would be good.
I have a friend who, what they did was they created this thing called a leadership as a service platform within their own internal organization. And so they don't do reviews. Everything is peer reviewed. So they made it a scenario where, like, everything is super transparent. And essentially all you do is, like, if you want to raise, you put it out to your team nominates you and votes on it. And if they say, yeah, give them a raise or her a raise, then you get a raise. And it's like they've eliminated middle management and just made it so easy that leadership, all they do is deal with kind of some of the more, personal or like, sensitive issues. But they set it up to where all the teams self-manage themselves.
That's interesting. I don't know that would work for us because we have so many creatives who work, I'm going to call them more siloed. So they do fantastic job editing audio or something like that, but they don't really touch base with their team.
Yeah.
But, so that would be more difficult. And our team is also all remote. So they're not in a location. So I think that would be harder for us. But I think there's got to be a way to conduct a similar style interview along the core values lines. That would be a review interview in a sense, and say, how are you measuring up against these core values of what we thought when we hired you, and how are you doing in achieving them? And we do it in self-assessment, and then we review that. Does that really meet that from what the leader thinks of it, or your direct manager? But it's really not, I'm going to say, I feel like there is no interview process, which I feel like there should be. There should be we should have a conversation. Yeah.
Well, review is kind of, it's funny, like I put that in the HR bucket and I try and stay away from it.
But I think it's a case of like whether or not your team's actually functioning and working, and whether your hiring is working might be this good evaluation tool after the fact. So I don't know. It's just thinking about growth expansion for you already. So you start a SaaS, you got to keep expanding it. Next product. If you don't already have enough to do.
Yeah, exactly. No, I mean, right now I think the gap is though there's lots of solutions out there that you can buy that help you manage your employees and run reviews and do all those things. But the gap in the market is that there's really nothing that runs an interview process.
Yeah.
It's either top of funnel or, once you get somebody working, it's those two things, but there's nothing in the middle.
So I love it. Well, Binge Factor listeners, as you know, sometimes we go off on tangents because their businesses of the podcast are so interesting and integral to what we do individually. That's what I love about podcast interviews and conversations and getting to know someone. So sorry we went off on the tangent of it, but hope that helps some of your businesses as you're struggling to grow and hire and do other things there. Well, Rick, do you feel that maybe the OC Talk Radio guy was right that you should have started a podcast sooner? I get that from people. Are you glad you started it when you did?
No, I'm glad I did when I did. I mean, I started it during a very weird time and in a change. And I think that helped me get through a lot of things. And it also helped save my business.
So, well, that's really good there.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for someone out there starting a podcast? What should they think about?
Oh, God, I'm one of these people that I do everything wrong and then I just learn from it. So try not to do what I did.
Or don't be afraid of it because it still worked out, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I learned a lot from it and I'm still learning from it. But, I think the one thing that I would say is that make it easy on yourself. I mean, kind of create a format that people want to listen to, and one of the things I kind of have a hard time with is like just general interview podcasts. I mean, you got to be giving some value back to your listener that they can go, hey, you know what? I can use this and I can plug it in my business or in my personal life or whatever. Right. So I think if you think of it that way, start with the audience first. I think that because my first probably 2 years of doing the podcast were just throwaways.
Well, it got really good. So, so I have to say that I always listen to one of your first episodes, where you might really talk about why you're doing the show, so I can hit on that somewhere in there. And then I listen to more of the recent ones. So yeah. And I have to say, you definitely improved over time. And that's the great thing about it is that I think audiences are really forgiving. They know you're going to learn and they're okay with that.
Yeah. I mean, it could be, I don't know. I still cringe when I ever go back to that first year and so, can you tell me about yourself? We
were timid interviewer. Well, you're not now. So you've gotten it down.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
Great. Well, wonderful. Well, Rick, I'm so glad I got you on the show here. I'm so glad we got to talk anything. Is there anything else you want to share with the audience? Anything about your book or anything that you'd like to share with us?
Sure. You know what? I'll show you my book. Although
I love the title. It's Healing Career Wounds.
Yeah, it's Healing Career Wounds. And, you might think that it's like a book for people who are looking for jobs, but it's actually the punchline. If you're hiring people and you're trying to build a really strong organization, if you can show the people that you're trying to recruit into your company that you can heal their career wounds, you can provide value to them above and beyond just the monetary aspect of it. you can stack the deck with really solid talent and avoid a lot of the hiring issues that we've all, experienced where
before they turn you down because they think you're going to be just like the last guy. So
yeah, exactly. You're differentiating yourself, it's basically the book is 100% my process from start to finish. It even includes scripts, and it's a fast read. I kept it it's 170 pages of my story. And then, hey, here's how you do this. And it's scripted out even so that you don't even really have to think about it.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, thank you for bringing your podcast, Higher Power, to the world. And thank you for bringing your book and your business to us all here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Trace. It was great to meet you. And we should go grab a beer, do lunch or something.
I would love that. Hope you enjoyed that talk with Rick Girard. I really did. It's so interesting to sort of get a perspective on someone who's tried different things within the podcasting space. So trying the radio model, trying recording live in studios, trying that, different formats for your show over time, trying to come up with different ways to make it really work and customize it for the business. And that's what I think Rick has done over time here. He's really dialed it in. And this is a big lesson to all of us out there who are, working on our shows all the time and doing it and just plugging away. Sometimes we need to take a little time, reflect a little bit, make little minor choices, make some shifts in our show. And then sometimes the whole system comes in and says, oh, you're not going to be here in the studio anymore. Look, I just talked to someone the other day who knew that they were recording and had a fire, and they had to shift everything to figure out what was going on. Such a shame, but these things happen. But sometimes they force us into a better place. And now this person that I was talking to is so excited about how much more they can podcast because they're not taking that extra time out of their day to go into a studio. They're just popping their computer on, getting started and recording over Zoom. So some things surprise us in the process. And that's what I think has really worked well for Rick, and that he's so committed to his show as a part of his business strategy. So listen to Higher Power Radio Show, check out Rick Girard, and come back next time for another episode of The Binge Factor.
You've been listening to the Binge Factor podcast. For more information on podcasting and videocasting success tips and tactics, please go to thebingefactor.com. And be sure to listen to our other show for podcasters called Feed Your Brand. If you'd like to be interviewed on this show, as well as featured in Tracy's column, please go to thebingefactor.com/guest and apply.